These are the journalisms by way of critical aggregation, illuminated from the analytical research of a historiographer, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Engage impulse engines. Engage.
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 Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain. Engage emergency override.
Engage.
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 Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Egypt's foreign minister visits Turkiye and Syria. Watch this space. Egypt's rekindling friendships. Egypt's made its first high-profile visit to Syria and Turkiye in a decade, marking a shifting landscape in Middle Eastern politics. The Middle East is a particularly volatile region of the world. Nations' allies and enemies sit right next door to them, and the constant wars and attacks changing the political landscape regularly. Despite all this, efforts to restore relations and bring peace are being made. And this is from atlasnews.co. On February 27th, Egypt's foreign minister Sami Shukri paid a visit to both Syria and Turkey, meeting personally with Syrian President Assad in Damascus and Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu. The visit marks the first such from a high-ranking Egyptian official in a decade. The goal of the visit is primarily humanitarian and to pass on solidarity from the leadership, the government, and the people of Egypt to the people of Syria, Foreign Minister Shukri says. Syria suffered from a severe lack of allies in the region since the breakout of the Syrian civil war. They were suspended from the Arab League, and many nations in the Middle East supported rebel groups in Syria in recent years. Largely due to the gains Assad's government has made in the war, relations have begun to warm. Isolating Syria simply was not working, and now, with the earthquake in early February, support, though limited, it's begun to flow into Syria. Egypt itself donated 1,500 tons of humanitarian aid to Syria during the visit, and Shukri said it's in their interest that relations return to normal. After the earthquake, Egypt's President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi spoke with Assad over the phone for the very first time, despite al-Sisi having been president since 2014. After his visit with Assad, Shukri continued on to the Turkish city of Mersin, an area hit by the earthquake. His arrival coincided with that of an Egyptian aid ship. What's important for us is to bring the relationships back to the old level and to take them very far in the interests of both countries in accordance with their common interests. The foreign minister's visit to Turkey is a part of a greater effort from both sides to warm relations between the two. They soured in 2013 after Egypt had a coup which removed their leader that Turkey's President Erdogan was friendly to. For quite some time, Erdogan stated he would refuse to meet with al-Sisi. However, on the sidelines of the 2022 Qatar World Cup, the two met. They shook hands, they held discussions, and the Turkish Foreign Minister Cavusoglu said that another meeting soon between al-Sisi and Erdogan was likely. During our talks today, we exchanged views on mutual visits in the upcoming period. Our Deputy Foreign Minister they met twice before, and it'd be beneficial for them to meet again. After our talks, our presidents can meet either in Turkey or Egypt, Foreign Minister Cavusoglu says. And back in November, Cavusoglu said it was their hope to reappoint an ambassador in the coming months, and no timeline has been given for when that may come. That's Atlas News. And from Ahram Online, this is Egyptian Foreign Minister Shukri to participate in G20 meetings, Raisina dialogue in India. Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shukri headed on Tuesday to New Delhi to participate in the meetings of G20 foreign ministers, as well as in the Rising Dialogue. That's 2023. Let's see what else we have. From Azer News, in rare visit, Egyptian Foreign Minister voices solidarity with quake-hit Turkiye. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri visited Turkey on Monday to show solidarity after two massive earthquakes jolted southern Turkey, his first visit after a decade of tense relations. Egypt's foreign minister said the trip aims to show solidarity with the two countries and their brotherly peoples after the devastating earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey earlier this month. The 7.7 and 7.6 magnitude quakes on February 6 killed more than 46,000 people in both countries. I'd like to thank Egypt for the support they extended to us within a short time, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said at a joint press conference, and it was with Shukri in front of an Egyptian vessel carrying aid at the port of Mersin in the eponymous Turkish Mediterranean province. He said Egypt sent at least 520 tons of humanitarian assistance to Turkey, in addition to early deliveries in the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe. Friendship and brotherhood can be seen in challenging times. The Egyptian people showed that they're brothers and sisters of Turkey once again in those challenging times, the minister added. And as you know, we're opening new pages in our relations with Egypt in Doha. Erdogan met Egyptian President Abdul Fattah el-Sisi, and the meeting was very beneficial. A short while ago in our meeting at the airport, we discussed which steps we can take to improve our relations. Improving relations between Turkey and Egypt will benefit both sides, not only for the two countries, but also for the stability and economic development of the region. As we said during our cold relations, Egypt's important for the region, Palestinians, the Arab world, Africa, as long as Egypt is strong. I certainly believe we can improve our relations. We'll continue working together to improve our relations even further. The fact that my brother Sameh Shukri is here today in Turkey is important and meaningful for us, he said. For his part, Shukri said, I want to express gratitude for the warm welcome here. I have a message of solidarity and support to the friendly Turkish people on behalf of the government, leadership, and Egyptian people. The catastrophe broke our hearts, and we're working in our full capacity to support our brothers and sisters in Turkey to overcome this catastrophe. Aid supplies that Egypt sent were the least Egypt could do to mitigate the suffering of people who were hit by the catastrophe. We prioritized ships through the Suez Canal carrying aid to Turkey, he said. Egypt's provided more than 1,200 tons of aid, material, and other things since the earthquake. In addition, Egypt's trade ship Al-Huwara arrived Monday morning at the port of Mersin with 525 tons of additional aid, including tents, blankets, mobile toilets, beds, and hygiene products. Condolences have poured in from around the world, expressing solidarity with Turkiye and many countries sending rescue teams and aid, including Egypt. And from Daily Sabah, Egypt aims to restore ties with Turkiye with new process. Egypt's foreign minister spokesman Ahmed Abu Zaid said Tuesday that they'd launch a new consultation process with Turkiye to put relations back on track. And those relations are between Cairo and Ankara. His remarks to Egyptian TV came after Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri's landmark visit to Turkiye on Monday. Zaid stated that Shukri's visit was a display of humanitarian solidarity following the February 6 earthquakes that hit Turkiye's south. Both sides gave several messages of their will to restore relations to their normal course following the meeting in Qatar, Zaid said. He added that Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and Shukri agreed upon a process where the two sides would directly engage with each other. In this process, topics for negotiations will be determined, as well as clear vision for both countries. This consultation process will be determining in rapid restoration of ties, the spokesperson said. And from All Arab News, Egyptian foreign minister makes rare visit to Syria and Turkey amid earthquake disaster. The Syrian regime has been largely cut off from the Arab world since the Syrian civil war began in 2011. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sami Shukri on Monday visited Turkey and Syria, marking the time in over a decade that a high-level official from Egypt has traveled to either country. Shukri met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the nation's capital of Damascus to express his support of the Syrian people in light of the recent devastating earthquakes resulting in more than 50,000 deaths in early February. The goal of the visit is primarily humanitarian and to pass on our solidarity from the leadership, the government, and the people of Egypt to the people of Syria, Shukri said. Al-Assad's been largely cut off from the Arab world since the Syrian civil war began in 2011. It was only last year that he made his first trip to an Arab nation when he visited the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, in United Arab Emirates. While in Turkey, the hardest-hit nation from the 7.8 magnitude earthquake, Shukri met with his counterpart, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu. He issued a statement of sympathy to those suffering from the devastating incident and promised continuity of aid for supporting Turkey and its brotherly people. Shukri said his time in Syria and Turkey was not just for humanitarian purposes, but that it also reflects the interest for relations between Egypt and the two countries to return to their normal status. From the Egypt Independent, Egypt adopts cooperation solidarity-based policy for good of all peoples. Egypt's always been open to its sisterly Arab nations, Foreign Minister Sami Shukri said on Monday in an interview with a satellite TV channel this evening. Ever since President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi took the helm, Egypt's adopted a foreign policy that's been based on cooperation, synergy, solidarity for the good of all peoples, not for destabilizing other countries, Shukri added. Reiterating Egypt's full solidarity with the Syrian people after the devastating earthquake earlier this month, Shukri said Egypt and Syria are bound by robust, deeply rooted ties. He also highlighted a mutual willingness at the political leadership of countries to push these ties forward, which was made clear by President Bashar al-Assad during the foreign minister's recent visit to Syria, the first by a top Egyptian diplomat in a decade. Shukri also stressed that Egypt doesn't interfere in the domestic affairs of Syria, but it's always provided support and synergy, whether of the humanitarian or political levels. Shukri visited Syria and Turkey on Monday to express solidarity with the countries following the earthquakes in a fresh move, showing Egypt's thawing relations with both countries. He met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, expressing his solidarity with the country following the deadly earthquakes on February 6, whose death toll in Turkey and Syria surpassed 50,000. Meanwhile, Assad told Shukri he appreciates President Sisi's phone call following the disaster. And from Press TV, this is Egypt's foreign minister visits Damascus for the first time in more than a decade and meets with Assad.
And now it's time for this hour's news review. Now, the Egyptian foreign minister has met with the Syrian president, the first visit by a top Egyptian envoy to Damascus in more than 10 years. Sami Shokri conveyed President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi's message of solidarity with Syria following a devastating earthquake that hit the country in early February. Shokri also expressed Cairo's willingness to strengthen bilateral relations. He held discussions with his Syrian counterpart, Faisal Mikdad, as well. On Sunday, a delegation of Arab parliamentary leaders visited Damascus and met with the Syrian president. Well, the visits indicate the Arab country's willingness to restore normal ties with Syria, whose membership in the Arab League was suspended in 2011. Well, I'd like to welcome my guests to this news review. Out of Damascus, Press TV's Mohammed Ali, and out of Brussels, journalist and political analyst Elijah Magner. Thank you both for being with us. We'll start off with Mohammed Ali. Mohammed Ali, tell us about this visit and what has taken place, the information you have on it so far.
Yes, Egyptian Foreign Minister Sami Shokri arrived this morning in Damascus International Airport. Then he headed directly to the presidential palace where he met Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and conveyed to him a letter of solidarity from Egyptian President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi. The letter expressed condolences, of course, and also it's a message of solidarity to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and all Syrians affected by the earthquake. Also, the letter expressed Cairo's keenness to bolstering, perhaps, historic relations between Syria and Egypt, and also boosting the joint cooperation between the two states. Now, this itself is an indication that this is not just a visit to express solidarity with Syria, but it's also kind of a visit considered as a first step in perhaps restoring normal relations between both countries. Now, President Bashar al-Assad thanked Egypt for its assistance since day one of this earthquake, and also said that improving bilateral ties among Arab states is a foundation for having a better general situation in the Arab world. Also, the foreign minister met with his Syrian counterpart, Faisal al-Mikdad, and they also discussed ways and means to boost cooperation.
Well, Elijah, your perspective, I mean, the overall significance, if we look at the line that these Arab regimes had taken towards Damascus over the years, it is quite a special day. Your overall perspective about these meetings taking place?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
I think the visit has different aspects. First of all, the Arab countries can do very little without the approval of the Americans and their European allies. Secondly, we've seen during the earthquake and the devastating consequences, the delay of the Arab and European that arrived at the end to Aleppo airport with the support to the civilian victims who were really in need of support. And when the Americans and the Europeans delayed such a support to after the possibility of finding anyone alive under the debris. Thirdly, this move is really, yes, something very special about the regaining of the visit of the Arab leaders, particularly from the side of this Egyptian government, because the day before the member of the parliament of many Arab states came to Damascus, but still this is not a real normalization with the relationship with Syria, although many Arabs argued in the past that it's better to return to Syria rather than leave it in the hand of Russia and Iran, the two countries that supported Syria in 2011 throughout the war, when all the Arab and the Gulf country conspired against Syria and invested billions of dollars.
So what's the bottom line in your perspective, Elijah? Why do you think that this visit? Why did they go to Syria? What are they after in your perspective?
Well, they're trying to say to Syria, we're coming to see you, but we still don't have the full support to restart the reconstruction. Syria needs between 500 and 800 billion dollars to be reconstructed. The Arab didn't invest anything. It's only a bit shy Russian support on the military side, but a lot of Iranian support. Every 15 days there is a tanker of oil. There is a humanitarian support that's coming through the border on a very regular basis. Where are the Arabs and the Gulf-rich countries? They don't dare to support Syria because Syria is still under the sanctions, still under Caesar sanctions, and the Americans are shying away their interest in Syria, although they are present in stealing the Syrian oil and the Syrian food basket. If they really want to support Syria, they just can leave and end their occupation and allow the Syrians to benefit from their own natural resources. So the return of the Arab is really a visit of a foreign minister, is not really a big event if it is not followed by a serious plan of reconstructing Syria.
All right, on that.
And from TRT, Egypt's foreign minister oversees aid delivery and visits Turkiye's quake zones.
I have a message of solidarity, support and sympathy for the Turkish people from the Egyptian president, government and people after the catastrophe that hit the country. The catastrophe broke our hearts. We are exerting all efforts to support our Turkish brothers and sisters to help with this tragedy. The aid supplies that we have offered are the least we can do to mitigate the suffering of the people injured in the earthquakes. Giving the international aid ships the priority to cross the Suez Canal has demonstrated the strong ties between the Egyptian and the Turkish people.
Shukri also made a stop in Syria's capital, Damascus, before arriving in Turkiye. The war in Syria, together with several other regional disputes, were at the heart of tensions between Egypt and Turkiye over the past decade. But after the quake struck on February 6, Egypt was among dozens of countries to provide quake relief supplies. International aid and support has been pouring in since the earthquake struck 3 weeks ago, killing more than 50,000 people in Turkey and Syria. And to further discuss the Egyptian foreign minister's visit to Turkey, joining me now from Lisbon is Riccardo Fabiani. He is the North Africa Project Director at Crisis Group. And from Doha, Ali Bakir, he is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and a professor at Qatar University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Ali, Egypt's Foreign Minister Shukri was in Turkey on Monday to oversee the arrival of hundreds of tons of earthquake aid to the stricken regions. Could you talk to us about the significance of this visit, which came after an interval of at least 10 years?
Thank you very much. I think that this is a very timely, very critical and important and welcome step from both sides. The fact that it is the first in 10 years is in itself very telling. I believe that there have been 3 factors that motivated the Egyptian side to take such step. First, the disaster diplomacy, if I may say, which offered a proper excuse or opportunity for Egypt to send its foreign minister, and also second, Egypt's economic status and currently which is under very pressure, and third, also the will of the Egyptian government to build on what both sides have achieved till now. So the circumstances are very proper. I think that it is also perceived very well from the Turkish side, and I think that now it's up to both sides to utilize this opportunity and to build on it rather than to let it fade away without achieving concrete steps.
So, Riccardo, what do you think? Is this a big development in terms of regional developments, and has earthquake diplomacy created another opening for Ankara and Cairo?
I think it's obviously an important development because it's the first time, right, that the Egyptian foreign minister in a long time visits Turkey, and this comes after the handshake between President Sisi and Erdogan in Doha at the Qatar World Cup. So there is, I would say, to a degree, a desire by both sides, surely from the Turkish side, to move forward with the rapprochement. And I think, obviously, what is happening now with the show of solidarity and support from the Egyptian is definitely something that we shouldn't dismiss. The problem, however, remains that, particularly from the Egyptian side, there are some very clear and I would say difficult to negotiate asks towards Turkey. And these obstacles will remain very difficult to navigate in this rapprochement. It is possible, of course, to conceive that at some point there will be some sort of diplomatic normalization, even though not all of these issues will be tackled. But these problems are still there, and they still need to be properly addressed.
So, Ali, what do you think? What challenges lie ahead? And how would fully restored ties between Turkey and Egypt impact the two countries' political standing, as well as the wider region?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely certain files that pose a challenge to the normalization of relations between the two sides. I believe that the first file would be the Libyan issue. Till now, the Egyptian side didn't radically change its policies concerning Libya, but once he decides to change that status, I think that Libya will open vast of opportunities to both sides on political, economic, security levels, and that will definitely, in my opinion, push the two sides to normalize relations. Currently, the economic situation in Turkey and in Egypt, I think that is a very pressing factor. And yes, despite the difficulty, it might convince both sides to reach an agreement on Libya. And if this happens, then things will be much smoother and easier concerning other regional issues. There is, from the Egyptian perspective, Ankara's policies towards Syria and Iraq, but I think that the situation in Syria should not be dealt from this perspective. It is an independent issue, and at the end it depends on the policies of Assad rather than Turkey and Egypt.
So, Ricardo, Egypt's foreign minister said Cairo will give priority to international aid ships to across the Suez Canal en route to Turkey. How significant is this, and how would this help boost aid efforts to Turkey as well as the two-country economic relations?
I think it's, again, a very tangible, direct move by Egypt to send a clear signal to Turkey that they are, and Syria, that they're on their side, that obviously they're willing to help them. I think it's symbolic also. It's very important right now at this stage to clearly show that there is a solidarity that goes beyond the political divisions that there could be between these two countries. It's also important to remember that even though Egypt and Turkey don't have fully fully developed normal diplomatic relations, they still have economic ties.
Sure, trade ties.
Yes. Exactly. And so this is, in my view, an important part of the picture, which shows that there is potential here to move forward on the file of going back to a normal bilateral relationship.
So Ali Shukri also visited Syria before arriving in Turkey. Are relations thawing between Cairo and Damascus?
At least visibly speaking. However, the U.S. blocked these efforts. Currently, these countries, including Egypt, are trying to utilize the humanitarian situation to push forward towards normalizing with Assad. Whether this will happen or not, and whether it will help facilitate further the Turkey-Egypt relations remains to be seen. But I think that, as I said before, the Syrian issue is very complicated. There are a lot of players and a lot of interests, and we have the refugees problems, we have the legitimacy problems, and these would pose vast challenges to Egypt and any other country who tries to normalize with others without pushing him to make a political transition and contain the refugee problem, at least on the short term.
Yeah, Ricardo, Ali says it's not going to be an easy job, but what would a fully normalized region mean for the world in terms of political stability?
I think this is probably the biggest challenge, but also the biggest potential opportunity for the stability of the region. And obviously that would have a series of positive repercussions beyond the Middle East and North Africa, and which are quite clear, especially for Europe, especially at this time with the war in Ukraine. It's clear that there has been a general trend towards reconciliation between many of the protagonists and the actors that were really involved in the sort of tensions that characterized the region for many years. And it's clear that there are a few missing, I would say, pieces in this puzzle. One of which obviously is Egypt, Turkey, and then the other one is obviously the sort of return of Syria to the sort of general Arab, I would say, international acceptance. And I think that with these two pieces at some point, hopefully in place, that could really lead and open up the possibility of a new era, a new phase in Middle Eastern relations. Of course, we would still have the big issue of Iran, but that's a separate question that is actually much more complicated.
So we only actually see openly, Ricardo, the United States is opposed to normalizing ties with Assad. But is it also the same for the European Union? Do you think the EU countries would toe the line with the United States or adopt a different approach towards Syria since they are so afraid of another refugee influx into Europe?
Well, I mean, it is very hard to answer this question at this stage, given that we are not really at an advanced stage in this kind of process of normalization of ties with Syria. But definitely, of course, considerations regarding stability and migration and refugees, etc., would definitely play a role, right? Because a normalized and stabilized Syria would also open up the possibility, at least in theory, from the point of view of some of the European governments, of then possibly sending back some of the refugees, and for sure, preventing the possibility of a new crisis. So these are all issues that would probably play a role in the considerations of the Europeans towards this issue. But obviously, right now, the I would say unity of the transatlantic relationship between Europe and the US is so strong that it is hard to imagine that there would be a major divergence on this issue.
So, Ali, let's say, I mean, I know it's not easy to materialize, but could the normalization of the region lead to a thaw in relations between Turkey and Syria moving forward?
Theoretically speaking, it's possible, but as I said before, we should not deal with Syria as a normal issue like any other issue like Egypt or the Gulf. It is a special issue which has its own circumstances and problems that should be solved also internally first before going to the regional dynamics and international dynamics. And so far we have not seen any step from Assad regime towards any kind of concessions or a kind of reform, which leaves us in a pessimistic situation, unfortunately, at least for myself. But assuming that a positive change happened in the Syrian theater, then definitely this will be reflected positively not only on Turkey and the regional Sham area and Gulf region, but also on the Eastern Mediterranean and on the regional level as a whole. But as I said before, this is a far-fetched idea, at least at the current moment. And I hope positive development happens in Syria. But again, this depends on what Assad is willing to do. And currently, there are no pressure from any side on Assad to do anything, which is not good, in my opinion.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.
Your engagement through a like, share, and subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. And IOF is losing steam amid ongoing anti-governmental protests. Values like Zionism and serving the state no longer seem to work as appealing mechanisms to prevent service members from leaving their duties. This is EnglishAlmayadeen.net. A report published by Haaretz on Tuesday revealed that the Israeli occupation forces were starting to disintegrate in the face of growing opposition against the new Israeli government. The term disintegrate is particularly referring to the fact that growing segments of the Israeli population are refusing to serve in the armed forces. The report, written by Israeli analyst Yossi Melman, states that the fear of internal disintegration within the IOF had surpassed the alleged Iran threat and the Palestinian uprising. Melman states that the protests which have been waged against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new extremist government, including the controversial reforms he's been carrying out, had caused a major disruption within the IOF's standard functioning. They also complicate the manpower directorate to attend the IOF staffing needs in the short and long run. They're likewise eroding the Army's morale and their motivation, as well as what Melman calls the ethos of the People's Army. The report identifies two particular reasons for all of this. First, Netanyahu's legal overhaul. Second, a provision that would exempt ultra-Orthodox from military service on a de jure basis. And growing concerns become clearly obvious when IOF Chief of Staff Herzl Halevi said at a graduation ceremony for combat officers that soldiers are subject to the law and the Army's orders and act in accordance with the IOF's spirit and values, he said. We'll be attentive to soldiers' feelings about the dispute, not in order to take sides, but to leave it outside and maintain a single IOF that's united around its complex missions. The report further states that an increasing amount of service members are deciding not to renew their contracts within the Army. Values like Zionism and serving the state no longer seem to work as appealing mechanisms. The fully right-wing government's policies are to blame for creating such divisions within Israeli society, the report says. Several reports have indicated that the reservist pilots and navigators are refusing to show up for drills and operational duty. Moreover, about 200 of Israel's most elite reservists threatened in a written letter that they'd stop exercising their duties if the judiciary reforms come to pass. An additional 500 former Shin Bet agents petitioned against the Prime Minister's judicial overhaul, outraged by their former leader's sudden change of political views towards the far right. Retired Mossad employees are also reportedly launching a similar petition, whilst Mossad Director David Barnea gave permission for employers or employees who rank below the level of the department head to take part in anti-government protests. Ahead of a likely Palestinian insurgency following the recent killing sprees carried out by the IOF, the report states that refusal to serve in the Army could very much weaken the IOD and threaten it with a possible collapse. And from presstv.ir, Iran urges unconditional removal of sanctions against quake-hit Syria. Actually, that's from the prior story. From Al-Mayadeen, protests in Israel grow alongside number of IOF deserters. Mass demonstrations in Israel against the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continue to grow. Israel media reported on Wednesday that the demonstrations spread to the extent that major roads were blocked by protesters. On February 26, the Israeli media highlighted the widening of the protests and added that hundreds of members of the security service have joined the demonstrations against the judicial amendments. IOF reserve desertions harm the security of Israel. The Israel's occupation security minister Yoav Gallant announced on Wednesday that every call to desert armed service in the Israeli occupation forces is an attack on Israel's security. For his part, the former Israeli security minister Omar Bar-Lev said on Tuesday that the desertions could become increasingly possible if the judicial revolution is approved. Bar-Lev in an interview also called for fighting with any means possible as soon as the judicial revolution takes effect. The former minister explained most of those serving in the reserves are volunteers, and as soon as they get worried about a coup or revolution, they'll definitely stop volunteering. Bar-Lev's statements came in response to the words of former Occupation Security Minister Benny Gantz, who ruled out yesterday's call to refuse conscription into the reserves. Bar-Lev defended his point of view, saying those soldiers and officers are defending Israel while endangering their lives. It's their right to withdraw and stop the decision to volunteer for service. Last week, more than 100 IOF soldiers or officers in the Special Operations System affiliated with military intelligence, including generals, signed a petition warning, if the legislation continues, will not continue to serve and will no longer serve in the reserves. It's noteworthy that about 2,000 demonstrators from the Israeli IOF Reserve organized marches in Al-Quds last February against judicial reforms. Most serious IOF reserve crisis since the October War, according to Israeli media. The IOF is concerned about serious crisis in the IOF reserves following the anti-Netanyahu government protests. An official in the IOF told Haaretz that the army is facing the most serious reserve crisis since the Yom Kippur War, October 1973. Hundreds of Israeli officers threatened to desert IOF reserve service. Yesterday, hundreds of reserve officers in Military Intelligence Unit 8200 in the IOF warned that they'll not volunteer to serve if the judicial amendment plan adopted by the Netanyahu government is passed. In a letter they sent to Security Minister Yoav Gallant, Chief of Staff Hartzi Halevi said Chief of Military Intelligence Amon Aaron Halifa, the reserve forces said, "We warn you that we're observing a disturbing accumulation of signs that warn of real fears for Israel's safety and security," as cited by Channel 13. A few days ago, Israeli media reported the resignation of an officer in the Israeli Air Force in protest against the draft judicial amendments. Judiciary reforms. The proposed legislation would prevent courts from overturning any amendments made by the government to Israel's quasi-constitutional basic laws, in addition to giving more weight to the government and the judge selection committee. The legislation undermining the occupation's judiciary independence is fundamental to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's administration, which is comprised of a coalition of extreme Zionist parties. Occupation President Isaac Herzog, who'd been aiming to mediate the crisis between the ruling Israeli parties and the opposition, voiced concern over the divisiveness of the legislation, whereby it threatens the unity of the so-called settler population. All right, watch this space. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, and subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. And the cradle. U.S. lawmakers approve resolution to uphold economic sanctions on Syria. UN experts have called on Western nations to immediately lift sanctions against Syria, highlighting the devastating impact these punitive measures have on the civilian population. The U.S. House of Representatives on 27 February approved Resolution 132, which urges the White House to remain committed to implementing unilateral economic sanctions on quake-struck Syria. In a 414-2 vote, lawmakers resolved that Washington must remain committed to the protection of the Syrian people, including by implementing the Cesar Syria Civilian Protection Act of 2019. Republican Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie were the only ones to vote against the resolution. While neither has publicly commented on their vote, Western media has painted their objection as a refusal to mourn the victims of last month's earthquake. I'm pleased the House overwhelmingly passed H.Res. 132, which urges the administration to remain committed to protecting the Syrian people, including by implementing the Cesar Act, House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCaul said. Following Monday's vote, stressing his concern about the growing push by Arab states to normalize ties with Damascus. McCaul added that enforcing unilateral sanctions on Syria must include disallowing any energy deal for Lebanon that benefits the Assad regime. Lebanon's been waiting since 2021 for Washington to provide Egypt, Jordan, and Syria with sanction waivers to launch a desperately needed energy sharing plan that the U.S. Embassy in Beirut brokered. In 2019, the U.S. Congress passed the Cesar Act, which strictly prohibited states, companies, and individuals from doing business with Syrian government. This crushing sanctions package came on top of existing punitive measures imposed on Damascus since 2011. U.S.-imposed sanctions on the war-torn nation have contributed to the tragedy of the Syrians at a time when the country is in the midst of a major humanitarian crisis with the U.S. occupation and the Kurdish Autonomous Administration controlling vast areas of land rich in oil, gas, and crops in the northeast of the country, in addition to the Turkish occupation of the other regions. Late last year, the U.S. Congress approved yet another sanctions regime against Syria with the so-called Captagon Act, which constitutes an integrated plan, security, political, and economic, to penetrate more into the vicinity of Syria and encircle it and prevent access to raw materials, according to Syrian researcher Bassam Abdullah. Monday's resolution came just weeks after the House was forced to issue a temporary sanctions waiver for Syria to allow the unimpeded entry of humanitarian aid to the country. It also coincided with the U.S. occupation army's latest oil smuggling operation in northeast Syria. And from Press TV, international campaign to launch popular convoy to break Syria blockade. A pan-Arab international campaign has announced plans for launching a popular convoy to confront the long-running blockade imposed by the United States and the European Union on Syria, which is currently suffering the aftermath of a devastating earthquake that so far claimed thousands of lives and left as many destitute across the Arab country. The Arab and International Campaign to Break Siege on Syria made the announcement on Friday after a meeting headed by its general coordinator, Magdi al-Masrahi, former Secretary General of the Arab National Congress, officially reported. The conferees studied a proposal to launch an Arab popular convoy from the west of the Arab world to its east under the title The Arab Unity Convoy to Break the Embargo Imposed on Syria, similar to the Convoy of Arab Unity Maryam to break the siege on Iraq, which started at the beginning of the current century from London towards Morocco, then towards Iraq, the campaign said. According to the statement, it was agreed that the members of the committee, along with the members of the General Arab Conference, personalities and parties in solidarity with Syria, would conduct contacts in order to make the initiative a success. The disastrous earthquake hit Turkey and neighboring Syria earlier this month, killing more than 50,000 in both countries, according to the latest figures, which are updated daily. As rescue efforts continue in Syria following massive earthquakes there, calls are growing for the U.S. and its European allies to remove their sanctions, which are said to be hampering international aid efforts in the country. Syria has been a target of U.S. sanctions since 1979. Since the start of the Syrian conflict in 2011, the U.S. and its Western allies have dramatically tightened their economic sanctions and restrictions on the Arab country. The U.S. sanctions intensified with the passing of the Caesar Act in 2019, which targeted any individual and business that participated either directly or indirectly in Syria's reconstruction efforts. The restrictive measures have blocked imports of essential goods, affecting the Syrian people's access to medical equipment, food, heating, gas, electricity. The sanctions have effectively cut Syria off from the global economy, leaving it dependent on a handful of allied states like Russia and Iran. The UN says over 5 million people in Syria have been affected by the earthquake and need shelter, food, and medicine. The disaster has multiplied the suffering of Syrians who've endured years of foreign-backed war and Western sanctions that left millions dead, displaced, and impoverished. And also from Press TV, Iran urges unconditional removal of sanctions against quake-hit Syria. Iran urges immediate and unconditional removal of Western sanctions against Syria as means of helping Damascus ride out the aftermath of the hugely deadly and devastating earthquake that hit the Arab country earlier this month. The Islamic Republic's ambassador to the UN, Amir Saeed Iravani, made the remarks before a UN Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East on Tuesday. The temblor that hit the country in neighboring Turkey on February 6 has so far killed more than 50,000 people on both sides of the border. The disaster has exacerbated the Arab country's already dire humanitarian situation, collapsing structures and basic services and severely affecting people's ability to meet their basic needs, Iravani said. Given the severity of the situation, humanitarian assistance must be scaled up and provided in an impartial and non-discriminatory manner, free of politicization or conditionality, to ensure that the most vulnerable individuals receive the assistance they require, he added. In order to more effectively address Syria's current humanitarian crisis, the international community must focus on lifting the inhumane unilateral sanctions. Syria has been a target of United States sanctions since 1979. The U.S. and its Western allies imposed more such bans on Damascus after 2011, when the country found itself in the grip of a rampant foreign-backed militancy and terrorism. The coercive measures intensified even further with Washington's passing of the Caesar Act in 2019, which targeted any individual and business that participated either directly or indirectly in Syria's reconstruction efforts. The Iranian envoy reminded that the Western measures amounted to blatant violations of international law and the UN Charter, adding that the sanctions had made it more difficult for the Syrian people to access their needs and have constrained the ability of government institutions to deliver basic services and improve living standards. In the face of overwhelming international criticism, the U.S. moved on February 10th to issue a temporary sanctions waiver to allow earthquake relief funds to reach Syria. Iravani, however, asserted that the exemptions were not sufficient, calling them only an attempt to create the appearance of concern. Therefore, it's not enough to offer words of solidarity without taking concrete actions. We call for the immediate, complete, and unconditional lifting of these unjustified sanctions, he remarked. The ambassador also condemned the continued plundering of Syria's national resources, primarily oil and gas, a trend that American occupation forces started under former U.S. President Donald Trump at a time when the Arab nation could use every last bit of its national wealth. Iravani cited Syria's official statistics that have shown that such criminal acts had resulted in theft of more than $100 billion in Syrian national resources and wealth. Turning to the issue of ongoing efforts at returning peace to the Arab nation, he noted that Iran would continue its endeavors with the Astana format to help achieve long-term and sustainable normalization in and around Syria. Since 2017, the Kazakh capital has been hosting many rounds of talks between the Syrian government and the opposition, with Iran, Russia, and Turkiye serving as the process's guarantors. In conclusion, the Iranian envoy condemned the Israeli regime's most recent attacks on Syria that targeted a residential building in a densely populated area in the capital Damascus on February 19. He denounced the offensive as a heinous attack that functions as a grave threat to regional peace and stability, saying the international community had to compel the Israeli regime to stop its repeated violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. At least 5 people, including a soldier, were killed, and 15 others were wounded in the Israeli strikes. Many of the wounded are in a critical condition, and many residential homes in the Syrian capital and its countryside were damaged. And remember, your engagement through a like, share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Today's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
Welcome back. This is Muck Rake, holding journalists accountable. It's Maalik Abdul on fault lines regarding Palestine.
The Palestinian National Authority confirmed their joint readiness and commitment to immediately work to end unilateral measures for a period of 3 to 6 months. It goes on to say that this includes an Israeli commitment to stop discussion of any new settlement units for 4 months and to stop authorization of any outposts for 6 months. The reason that I bring that up is barely hours after that meeting, Netanyahu actually says that there will be no freeze to construct settlement construction in the West Bank.
Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
We're talking about Ben Gvir, but what do you think this means? Because it clearly Netanyahu is taking a rightward track when it comes to his government, but it's not just Ben Gvir. It's actually some of the decisions that Netanyahu is making himself. How do you think that this is going to play out on?
And Maalik Abdul is asking this of Benjamin Rubenstein of Mint Press News.
And I'll say on the world stage, because some of the things that, we can kind of turn a blind eye to some things, but what we saw just, what was it, last week when they were trying to go after, I believe, 2 people and ended up injuring, what was that, almost 70 people?
It's like 100 plus, yeah.
Wow.
So it was basically like a Palestinian crystal knocked. It was a pogrom.
Oh no, but please go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, Netanyahu obviously is definitely one of the most evil people alive. Israel has agreed to a lot of things with third parties, other nations, and they never fall through. There's still no Palestinian state, and the Palestinian Authority is basically, doing the dirty work of the Israelis. And holding back the resistance. So I don't think it's too impactful. In terms of the global consequences, I think that there are factions within the Israeli government maybe that are wanting to slow things down because they realize that Israel is facing an existential threat within the current global climate, because relations between Israel and Russia, for example, are deteriorating as Israel gets closer to Ukraine. And if we do end up in a, World War III situation, which we're getting closer to every day, if Russia sides with Palestine in a more material fashion, and you've got Hezbollah in Lebanon, and you've got Syria, and, the possibility of a third intifada, Israel can't win that fight. And we're moving in that direction rapidly. And so I think there are some factions within the Israeli government that recognize that. And there are some that, they have their delusions and they think, they're God's chosen people and that God will protect them. And, then there are people who just don't care. So I definitely think we're at a critical moment in this sort of history.
Yeah, and
you're right. It is a call. It was in Jordan.
In Jordan, yeah. So one of the people that was killed in the recent wave of violence this past week was a 27-year-old motorist.
And from the cradle, destruction of the third temple, Israel on the brink of civil war. Recent mass protests in Israel against controversial, undemocratic judicial reforms have raised concerns about the potential for domestic civil clashes, which threaten the fundamental stability of the Jewish state. Yes, that's from the cradle, destruction of the third temple of Israel on the brink of civil war. As tens of thousands of Israelis rallied in protest against their government's judicial reform plan, the Israeli army conducted a major security operation in Nablus on 22 February, resulting in the death of 11 civilians and injuries to more than 100 others. The ongoing demonstrations against the controversial bill are becoming increasingly violent, with angry slogans and protesters' actions lending to the recent killing of a demonstrator by the Israeli police in the city of Beersheba in southern occupied Palestine. One defining moment of the protests occurred last week during the first vote on the draft judicial reforms, when protesters were able to storm the Knesset Parliament building before being removed by security forces, undermining the region's only democracy. The judicial reform plan is one of the most significant initiatives of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's sixth government. It aims to limit the powers of judges, which currently exceed those of Knesset deputies, and to allow for exceptional intervention by Knesset members in the appointment of judges. Netanyahu's opponents argue that the reform plans, led by Justice Minister Yair Levin, are a brazen attempt to politicize and undermine the judiciary in order to protect the Prime Minister from prosecution on long-standing charges of corruption and breach of trust. According to Chief Justice Esther Hayut, the proposed reforms will deprive the court of the option to override laws that disproportionately violate human rights, including the right to life, property, freedom of movement, as well as the basic right of human dignity and its derivatives, the right to equality, freedom of speech, and more. Former Chief Justice Aaron Barak expressed similar concerns, calling the bill the beginning of the end of the Third Temple, an apocalyptic expression, and fear denoting the beginning of Israel's demise. In his book, The Third Temple, Israeli reporter and writer Ari Shevet analyzes how in the state's eighth decade, the Israelis have become their own enemies. The Israelis have become their own enemies. With security challenges, one can cope, but the disintegration of identity cannot be overcome. In the corridors of Israeli power, the term treason is being bandied around more frequently, in parallel with National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir in his call for police to deal more firmly with domestic protesters. Following Israeli President Isaac Herzog's warning that Netanyahu's plan could push the country to the brink of constitutional and social collapse, the term civil war is being routinely used by the Hebrew press, with Haaretz analyst Anshel Pfeffer opining that civil war is no longer unthinkable. Over the last few days, I found myself in conversations I never imagined I'd have. But the topic is deadly serious. The various ways a civil war might suddenly break out and who would win, muses Pfeffer, asking ominously, will Israel's law enforcement security agencies and the military take sides? I think it's a bit late for that. I mean, it's like, it is a fascist government. When you have civilians, you have people walking around being protected by police to attack other people, that's fascism. There's no other way around it. Israeli affairs researcher Ismail Mohammed tells The Cradle that the notion of a civil war in Israel is no longer just a pipe dream hoped for by the occupation state's adversaries. Yedidia Stern, head of the Jewish People Policy Institute founded by the Jewish Agency, had said that Israel is closer to civil war than at any time since the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in 1995. And the withdrawal from Gaza in 2005. Both are events in which Israel teetered on the brink of civil war. The battle for judicial reform in Israel is not just a simple conflict, but rather reflects deeper issues that touch on the identity of the state and its social composition. The goal of some political groups, such as the coalition of Ben-Gvir and right-wing finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, is to change Israel from a secular liberal state and into a state based on religious law, to regulate religious observances from the daily conduct of Jews, or in Hebrew terminology, a form of halakha. This is also evident in the statement made by Haredi Ashkenazi, a lawmaker Yitzhak Pindrus, who, on the 74th anniversary of the Nakba, expressed a desire to blow up the building of the Supreme Court, which governs secular civil laws that are contrary to religious teachings. The polarization isn't only between secular and religious Jews. The ugly division between Eastern and Western Jews is also rearing its head. Ben Giver, for instance, has repeatedly called for reducing the power of the Ashkenazi over the state, demanding the inclusion of Sephardic Mizrahi Jews in Israel's institutions. A recent statement by Otzma Yehudit, MK's Vika Vogel, on the Hebrew Con 11 website reflects a significant shift from mere political differences to an existential clash between two different Israels. Vogel called for the arrest of the opposition politicians Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, Yair Golan, and Moshe Ya'alon for fanning civil war, describing them as the most dangerous people at the present time in Israel. As Israeli affairs analyst Anwar Saleh explains to The Cradle, the issue is much more serious than a demand for equality and citizenship. Netanyahu's extremist coalition holds convictions that affect the very foundations of the state, such as a return to the elementary question of who's a Jew. The political demographic considers that secular Jews, who constitute more than 44% of Israelis, are false Jews, and that the current government, which is controlled by the religious right, who make up 20% of the population, represent the true spirit of Judaism. Saleh continues. This debate happening today, 74 years after the state of Israel was created, affects the very basis on which the Jewish Agency launched its immigration program to draw Jews to Palestine. It's noteworthy that over 50 investment companies have moved their business from Israel to other countries since the start of the protests, and this mass flight includes 37 technology firms. The development prompted Israeli Minister of Science and Technology Ofer Okunis to hold a private meeting with foreign ambassadors in Tel Aviv, during which he urged them to take a stand on the matter. In response, the tech firms released a statement refusing to repatriate $2.2 billion in earnings from their foreign operations back to Israel. The owner of these companies have also expressed concern about a drop in the country's credit rating because politicians are now appointing judges which they see as an unfavorable environment for business. This had prompted a number of investors to transfer funds in Israel abroad. Moses' staff. Even if Netanyahu today wielded the powerful staff of Moses, he would not be able to beat down the powerful domestic schisms tearing Israel apart. However, the one tool at the prime minister's disposal is to divert Israeli attention elsewhere, though this will eventually reignite conflict within. In essence, whether now or later this country will face its civil conflict. Despite its many differences, Israeli society is united in the perception fanned by their politicians and media that it's under existential threat from the outside. Observers speculate that Netanyahu only hope to quell internal conflict now is to manufacture a hot external threat. The occupied West Bank is seen as the least politically sensitive and most flexible option for action, according to political analyst Ayman al-Rifati. He explains to The Cradle that, unlike in the past, Gaza today is the theater in which Israel seeks to maintain calm in order to avoid military escalation during the coming Ramadan season. The increasing sophistication of missiles held in Gaza's resistance arsenals also poses too high a risk, with unknown and uncontrollable consequences that Israel may have to bear. The West Bank, conversely, is relatively unweaponized, with small arms concentrated in much fewer hands. And despite a steady stream of threats from Tel Aviv, there are no indications of Israel starting a war with either Iran or with Hezbollah, although the option of carrying out targeted security operations that elicit a reaction from those opponents remains active. And the recent attack by Jewish settlers on the town of Huwara in the West Bank city of Nablus is a byproduct of Netanyahu's efforts to mobilize Israeli settlements toward launching a comprehensive confrontation with West Bank Palestinians. One of the key objectives of this clash is to draw attention away from Israel's internal collapse.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again, which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
The whole notion of logic.
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Upheld, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
And from Mayor News, Palestinian resistance conduct 61 anti-Zionist operations. News sources reported on Wednesday morning that the Palestinian resistance forces carried out 61 operations against the Zionists in the last 24 hours. Palestinian Statistics Center announced that the Palestinian resistance forces carried out operations against the Zionists in the West, leaving 17 Zionists wounded. According to the report, the Palestinian resistance forces confronted the Zionist forces in different areas of the West Bank by shooting and throwing explosive devices. And the report adds that the operations of the resistance forces in Ramallah took place at the Atara crossing, Sanjal, Salwad, Al-Khalil, Kalkilia, and Nablus. Earlier on Monday, 3 Zionists, including an officer, a soldier, they were both injured when Palestinians threw stones at their car in the village of Wadi al-Haramiyah, north of Ramallah in the West Bank. Also, Palestinians set a Zionist bus on fire with a Molotov cocktail on a road in the west of Ramallah, according to local sources. 5 Zionists were also injured as Palestinians opened fire at their car near the Kashfa settlement in the southeast of Nablus. And finally, from the cradle, Israel frees settlers arrested for pogrom in Huwara. Despite growing international condemnation, officials in the far-right Israeli government have called on Palestinian villages to be burned and erased. Israeli authorities have released 8 suspects arrested in connection to Sunday night's rampage by Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank village of Huwara, which killed 1 Palestinian, injured hundreds, and destroyed dozens of homes and vehicles. According to Israeli media, 6 settlers were freed and 2 others were placed on house arrest. The Times of Israel reports that another 6 settlers were detained on the morning of 1 March. The Israeli military estimated that between 300 and 400 people participated in the pogrom. Authorities said the suspects were suspected of rioting, setting fire to vehicles, and buildings, assaulting Palestinians, causing damage to property in Huwara. On 26 February, dozens of Israeli settlers descended on the Palestinian village of Huwara, attacking Palestinians with metal rods and rocks. According to eyewitness reports, the Israeli military witnessed the violence but took no action to stop it. The release of the extremist settlers from detention fits into a pattern of Israeli tolerance for attacks against Palestinians, as only 3% of investigations into attacks against Palestinians result in conviction, and 93% of investigations close without an indictment, according to the Israeli rights group Yesh Din. On 27 February, the U.S. State Department released its 2021 report on terrorism in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, determining that the Israel security forces regularly failed to prevent violent attacks by settlers against Palestine in the occupied West Bank. I would go even further to say that security forces commit the majority of the terrorist crimes in Israel. In response to the violent raid of Huwara, the Israeli general in charge of troops in the West Bank, Yehuda Fuchs, on Tuesday accused Jewish supremacist groups of spreading terror. There we go. And what happened in Huwara was a pogrom carried out by lawbreakers, Fuchs told Israel's Channel 12 News in an interview. We were not ready for pogrom on the scale of dozens of people with flammable material and the means to set it on fire, heading to 20 or more places, as well as confronting soldiers and commanders and police at the junction and setting random Palestinian homes and cars on fire. However, despite this condemnation and Washington's strongly worded disapproval of Sunday's pogrom, officials in the far-right government have continued to fan the flames of violence. Zvika Fogel, a member of Netanyahu's government coalition and a member of the anti-Arab religious Zionism Purity, said, following the rampage, a terrorist came out of Huwara, and Huwara was closed and burned. This is what I want to see. That's the only way we'll achieve deterrence. Villages should burn when the army does not act, he added. Meanwhile, in a tweet that's since been deleted, Davidi Ben Zion, deputy head of the Samaria Regional Council that governs illegal settlements in the northern occupied West Bank, said, the village of Huwara should be erased. This tweet was liked by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who leads the religious Zionist party alongside National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. How ironic is it here that he's the head of a council that governs illegal settlements. So they're recognizing an authority figure of an illegal council. Why? It's totally contradictory. But on that note, I'm going to open up a channel here. And remember, your engagement through a like, a share, a subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up, quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.